Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, May 7th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Israeli ground forces enter Rafah. So Israeli tanks have entered Rafah and appear to be pushing to capture the Palestinian side of the Rafah border crossing that connects to Egypt. And this was reported by several media outlets kind of late Monday night here in the U.S., early Tuesday morning over in Gaza. But it looks like the Israeli invasion of Rafah is on here. The question is if this is a full-scale invasion or if it's more of a limited operation. Either way, there's probably going to be a large number of civilian casualties in this. Heavy airstrikes have been reported in the city as well, with some media reports describing it as a carpet bombing. The scale of the destruction and the death toll is unclear at this time. I saw Al Jazeera was reporting that there was at least 12 deaths so far in the airstrikes, but that number is expected to rise. An Egyptian official told the Associated Press that the Israeli operation could be limited and that Israeli forces could soon withdraw. But Egypt is also preparing for the possibility of a major influx of Palestinian refugees entering its territory. According to Middle East Eye, Egyptian intelligence is estimating that somewhere between 50,000 and 250,000 Palestinians could flee toward the Sinai Peninsula. And, this could be part of Israel's, desire and Israel's goal of ethnic cleansing. They want to probably push as many Palestinians as they can into Egypt. A source told Axios that Israel plans to take control of the Rafah border crossing and monitor all the aid that enters Gaza, a sign that Israel is seeking long-term control of this area. The military activity near the Rafah crossing will obviously further disrupt aid shipments into Gaza as Palestinians in the north are facing a full-blown famine, according to the World Food Program. Israel's move on Rafah comes after Hamas said that it accepted an Egyptian and Qatari proposal for a ceasefire. So that made big headlines on Monday. Hamas put out a statement that said they accepted a proposal from Egypt and Qatar, and those are the two countries mediating the talks between Israel and Hamas. Hamas said that they accepted the proposal, and some people were hopeful that meant there would be a ceasefire. Palestinians in Gaza were celebrating on the street, but the Israelis essentially rejected it, saying that it did not meet their core demands, and said that Israel would go ahead with military operations in Rafah. So they're saying that they're going to send negotiators to Cairo still, but they're going through with this attack on Rafah. The office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement, quote, "The War Cabinet unanimously decided this evening Israel will continue its operation in Rafah in order to apply military pressure on Hamas so as to advance the release of our hostages and achieve the other objectives of the war," end quote. So earlier on Monday, Israel said that it ordered the evacuation of about 100,000 Palestinians from eastern Rafah and warned that extreme force would be used in the area. So it was pretty clear that they were about to launch something big in Rafah. And Rafah is estimated to be packed with about 1.4 million Palestinian civilians, and the majority of them are displaced. The city has a pre-war population of about 275,000. So that gives you an idea of how densely populated it is. I know, several thousand Palestinians started to flee the city, but Israel continued to bomb it. They Sunday night into Monday they were bombing Rafah. Right after giving the evacuation order, they were bombing Rafah. Now they're continuing it, and there's Israeli troops and tanks on the ground now. So aid groups have slammed the Israeli order since there's nowhere for the Palestinian civilians to go. Israel suggested that the Palestinians go to Al-Mawasa refugee camp on the coast, but the Norwegian Refugee Council said that the camp did not have the resources to accept the evacuees. Oxfam America pointed to the fact that Israel has bombed so-called safe zones in Gaza throughout the past 7 months, and all sorts of other aid groups are saying, condemning this and saying it's just going to lead to the death of more civilians. And, this is going to be just such a mess. And this goes to show, we've seen U.S. officials, even on Monday, they were still saying, we're against an Israeli, full-scale invasion of Rafah is essentially what they're saying, kind of leaving open the possibility that they supported a more limited operation, which still is going to disrupt the aid and kill lots of civilians. But we've seen the U.S. officials say that they're against Israeli plans to attack Rafah without a clear plan to protect civilians. Israel orders an evacuation and is bombing the place. I mean, it's just there's nothing orderly about this Israeli evacuation plan, and they're going ahead with an attack on the city. And U.S. weapons continue to flow to Israel. They haven't put any real pressure on the Israelis, and that's very clear now because they're going through with this attack on Rafah and basically rejecting the ceasefire. So the next one here, a baby saved from a dying mother's womb killed by an Israeli strike. So this article is from Middle East Eye, and these were strikes that hit Rafah, I believe, Sunday night into Monday morning. And this is a baby who was about 6 months old who was born on October 23rd, the same day that both his parents' lives were ended by Israeli bombs. The baby's name was Hani Mahmoud Kishta. And essentially what happened is his mother died, but she was 8 months pregnant at the time. They rushed her to the hospital and were able to do the C-section. And so he was born, and then the mother died hours later. I know in some cases there's been women who were dead and they were able to get the babies out. There was one recently in Rafah, same thing happened, but unfortunately the baby died in 5 days. It was very premature. So just an example of the horror that is happening for people on the ground. I mean, this baby, and they quote the baby's cousin who says, he was born in war and he died in war. And there have been cases I've seen of babies born after October 7th who've been killed by Israeli bombings. I mean, and this is a war on children. It's slaughter. Over 14,000 children have been killed. And there's going to be a lot more stories like this as this Rafah attack continues. All right, so the next one here, everything you need to know about Gaza truce proposal that Hamas agreed to. So this article is from Al Jazeera. They got a hold of apparently what Hamas said that they agreed to, this proposal. Hamas officials have shown Al Jazeera a copy of the Egyptian-Qatari ceasefire proposal that the movement says it has agreed to. The proposal includes 3 phases and would see an end to Israel's war on Gaza, as well as the release of Israeli captives held in the enclave and Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. Hamas's announcement on Monday was met with celebrations in Gaza as Palestinians hoped it would finally bring an end to a nearly 7-month-long war in which Israel has killed at least 35,700 Palestinians. But Israel's response has been less enthusiastic, to put it lightly. And for its part, the U.S. has been tight-lipped. Officials I was watching the State Department press briefing on Monday, and they wouldn't. Matt Miller basically refused to comment on this because there's a big question here is the U.S. has been involved. I think William Burns, the head of the CIA, is still over there in the Middle East, has been involved in these mediations. The question is, was this also a U.S., is this a deal that the U.S. approved and Israel is rejecting outright? So just they have the details of this proposal. It says the agreement is a complicated one and would involve 3 phases, each of which would last 6 weeks. In the first phase, there would be a temporary cessation of hostilities between Hamas and Israel, as well as a withdrawal of Israeli forces to the east, away from the more heavily populated areas of Gaza and towards the border between Israel and the Palestinian enclave. Israeli airplanes and drones would also stop flying over Gaza for 10 hours each day and for 12 hours on days when captives are released. Hamas would gradually release 33 captives, whether captives who are alive or the remains of captives who have died. In the first phase, the captives will be women, anyone above the age of 50, those who are sick or non-soldiers under 19. For each civilian Israeli captive released alive, Israel would release 30 Palestinians that it has detained. So the withdrawal of Israeli forces would allow displaced Palestinian civilians to return to their homes across Gaza. So that's another thing that Israel has not wanted to do, is let the Palestinians who evacuated from the north return to the areas that they left. So there would be a second phase of the deal that would be a permanent end to military operations and a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. There would also be another prisoner swap, the remaining Israeli hostages and more Palestinian prisoners. The third phase would see an exchange of the remains of captives and prisoners held by both sides. And this would also include a 3 to 5 year reconstruction plan for Gaza, and an end to the Israeli blockade. So, I mean, I can't imagine Israel going for this plan. I just don't see it. It's very clear that Netanyahu's not going to want to do this, and that most of the Israeli government, the members of the Knesset, they don't want to end this thing. They want to continue. So I just can't see Israel going for this. But they're saying that they're going to still negotiate. So, but I just have very little hope, especially now that the Rafah thing has started. And I would be surprised if Israel just goes in and pulls out real quick at this point. Once Netanyahu's got it started. So I just don't see him backing out. All right, so the next one here, Republican senators threaten the ICC on behalf of Israel. So a group of 12 Republican senators sent a letter to the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, that threatens severe sanctions and hints at other action if the court issues arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli officials. The letter was dated April 24th, and it says that action against Israeli officials would result in severe sanctions. And a copy of this letter was obtained by Zetio. It's a media outlet I have not heard of. It's a Substack. But anyway, the senators referenced the American Service Members Protection Act, a law that authorizes the president to use any means to free any U.S. or allied personnel detained by the ICC. The law is nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act. So this is the law that they reference in this letter. The letter reads, quote, if you issue a warrant for the arrest of the Israelis, we will interpret this not only as a threat to Israel's sovereignty, but as a threat to the sovereignty of the United States. Our country demonstrated in the American Service Members Protection Act the lengths to which we will go to protect that sovereignty, end quote. The senator said that the ICC did not have the jurisdiction to issue warrants since neither the U.S. nor Israel are members of the court. But the state of Palestine, which includes Gaza and the West Bank, was accepted as a member of the ICC in 2015, even though the state of Palestine is not a internationally recognized state. It has some observer status at the UN and at some of its courts. And it was accepted as a member of the ICC in 2015. So any warrant would be related to Israel's actions in Gaza. The letter concludes, quote, the United States will not tolerate politicized attacks by the ICC on our allies. Target Israel and we will target you. If you move forward with the measures indicated in this report, we will move to end all American support for the ICC, sanction your employees and your associates, and bar you and your family from the United States. You have been warned, end quote. So this is some threat, and I saw some people, say it sounds like they sound like mobsters with these threats that they're making. And this was a letter to the chief prosecutor of the ICC. One important point here is that the U.S., recently supported the ICC issuing an arrest warrant for Russia, even though Russia is not a member of the ICC and neither is Ukraine. So where does the jurisdiction there? So, if they're using that logic to oppose this. And on May 3rd, the ICC issued a statement condemning threats against the court and said that attempts to impede, intimidate, or improperly influence ICC officials must cease immediately. So the 12 Republican senators who signed on to this thing include Mitch McConnell, Tom Cotton, Marsha Blackburn, Katie Boyd Britt, Ted Budd, Kevin Cramer, Ted Cruz, Bill Hagerty, Pete Ricketts, Marco Rubio, Rick Scott, and Tim Scott. So pretty serious threats that they're making here. All right, so the next one here, Mitt Romney says that Congress supports banning TikTok for Israel. So in a conversation with Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Senator Mitt Romney acknowledged that banning TikTok has such strong support in Congress because the social media platform has hurt Israel's public relations battle. Romney said at the McCain Institute this past Friday, quote, "Some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at the postings on TikTok and the numbers of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly so among TikTok broadcasts," end quote. So he's saying because Palestinians are mentioned more on TikTok, that's why there is overwhelming support in Congress to shut it down. I mean, it's really something that he said there. And the official justification for targeting TikTok is the unfounded allegation that it's a Chinese spy tool because its parent company, ByteDance, is based in China. But Romney's comments suggest that the real purpose of the renewed push to ban the app after a similar effort failed years ago was to censor news coming out of Gaza and pro-Palestinian content. So Blinken, this is a conversation he had with Blinken, one of these think tank events. And Blinken blamed social media in general when asked by Romney why was Israel losing the global PR war. And anyone that's been, I don't have TikTok, but I know on Instagram, kind of earlier like back in October, November, December, before there was the real communications breakdown, and when that bombing was really, really heavy. You could go on Instagram and look at Palestinian journalists posting, just the aftermath of the airstrikes and people digging through the rubble and pulling out dead or mangled children. I mean, just really horrific stuff. So people see that. I mean, it's unprecedented. Could you imagine if in previous, like, really heavy bombing campaigns like this, like back in Vietnam or, World War II or Korea, and the people, like, imagine the people in Japan that could film the firebombing of Tokyo and post that on Instagram or something. So it kind of is unprecedented in a way, and they're not happy about it. And this is what Blinken said. He said, quote, "Now, of course, we're on an intravenous feed of information with new impulses, inputs every millisecond. And of course, the way this has played out on social media has dominated the narrative. You have a social media ecosystem environment in which context, history, facts get lost, and the emotion, the impact of images dominate. We can't discount that, but I think it also has a very, very challenging effect on the narrative," end quote. So it's really something here. And the bill to ban TikTok was included in the $95 billion foreign military spending package that Biden signed into law last month. And that legislation gives ByteDance 9 months to sell TikTok, or else it will get banned. And ByteDance is saying that it will fight the ban legally and that it would rather shut down TikTok than sell. So we'll see how that plays out over the next year or so. But I mean, just the admission here, and it's just really something. So hopefully, this, I think we're going to start an antiwar.com TikTok because they're trying to ban it. It makes us want to get on there more so. All right, so the next one here, Moscow warns that it can strike British military targets. So this story is definitely concerning here. Russia has warned the UK that it could target British military installations and equipment in Ukraine and beyond if Ukrainian forces use British-provided weapons to strike Russian territory. Russia made the warning directly to the British ambassador in Moscow, who was summoned in response to the British Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, saying that Ukraine has the right to use British weapons in attacks on Russia. So here's the response. I covered that story man, my memory is shot. Did I cover it yesterday maybe or last week? But either way, I mean, that's a huge escalation. That the British saying, yeah, the Ukrainians can use these weapons we give them to hit Russian territory. And that includes the Storm Shadow missiles, which have a range of 155 miles. So here's Russia's response. The Russian Foreign Ministry said in a statement, quote, any British military facilities and equipment on the territory of Ukraine and beyond could be a response to Ukrainian strikes with the use of British weapons on the territory of Russia. The ambassador was called upon to reflect on the inevitable catastrophic consequences of such hostile steps by London and to immediately refute the belligerent, provocative statements of the head of the Foreign Office in the most decisive and unequivocal way, end quote. So a very serious statement here from the Russians. And this isn't just, like Medvedev saying something hawkish, and this is, they summoned the ambassador and told them, if Ukraine starts using your weapons to hit us on our territory, we're going to hit you. I mean, this is very, very, very serious. The fact that this isn't a bigger story kind of all over the news is surprising. And I think, this goes to show that they keep pushing. The U.S. and NATO countries keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And their logic is, well, Russia hasn't bombed a NATO base or anything yet. So now, And the question is, can the British control the Ukrainians? What if the Ukraine sees this as an opportunity to escalate and uses a British weapon to hit Russia? And so there's British troops in Ukraine, a small number, probably just a handful. But there was that German military leak that revealed that they are actually on the ground helping the Ukrainian forces fire the Storm Shadow missiles. And the UK confirmed that it has a small number of troops inside Ukraine. So I'm sure Russia knows where they are. I mean, what would happen if Russia, took out this small group of British soldiers that are in Ukraine? What would the next step be? And when you have an alliance like NATO, an entangling alliance like NATO, the UK, they're pretty much out of weapons to send Ukraine. They've said already their military is very small, and they say that they wouldn't be able to last I think our British general recently said they couldn't last 2 months in a war with Russia, but the general also said, but don't worry, we're in NATO, so we got the U.S. to back us up. So you have these smaller countries that act way more belligerent when they're part of big alliances like this. So it's not good if we're kind of relying on, if there's a chance here of the British really escalating this into like a full-blown war with Russia, because they've been one of the most belligerent NATO countries throughout this whole thing. So definitely concerning. And that was not Russia's only response to what's been happening lately. Russia is holding nuclear drills in response to Western provocations. So this story, the Kremlin said on Monday that Russia will hold drills simulating the use of tactical nuclear weapons in response to the latest provocations from the West. So Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov pointed to comments from Western officials about sending troops to Ukraine to fight Russian forces. Last week, French President Emmanuel Macron reaffirmed his view that deploying NATO soldiers should not be ruled out despite the risk of nuclear war. So another thing, it's a very provocative thing that he has been saying constantly, and Russia is responding to it. So Peskov said, quote, they talked about the readiness and even the intention to send armed contingents to Ukraine. That is to actually put NATO soldiers in front of the Russian military, end quote. And another thing, an important point I kind of mentioned in the last story is that all this talk about NATO troops to Ukraine has highlighted the fact that there is a small number of NATO troops. The Discord leaks revealed in 2023 that there was about 100 NATO Special Operations Forces inside Ukraine. But what Macron is talking about is sending ground forces to actually fight the Russians. And, that's World War III. That's a nuclear war. It's completely insane to be talking about this. And Russia is starting to respond to all this rhetoric. Russia's defense ministry also referred to provocative statements and threats against Russia by certain Western officials when announcing the nuclear drills. So these will be conducted. These drills will be conducted. They're saying it's going to be they're going to practice the preparation and use of non-strategic nuclear weapons, which means tactical nuclear weapons. And they will be conducted by Russian military forces based in the Southern Military District, which is based in the southern city of Rostov-on-Don in southern Russia, southwestern Russia, I should say, pretty close to Ukraine and everything. So this is definitely, concerning to see two things in one day. And it's not a surprise. We shouldn't be surprised by any of this, but Russia, hopefully they get the message and start backing down with some of this stuff, because it's just been completely insane lately. This rhetoric from these Western officials, and the U.S. now sending all these weapons again with the new aid. There's just still that, we kind of got used to there being a war in Ukraine, but still always that risk of it exploding. All right. So the next one here, Ukraine wants U.S. Reaper drones for long-range attacks. This article is from Kyle Anzalone. So as Ukraine steps up its use of long-range munitions provided by Washington, it is also seeking to obtain the U.S.-made MQ-9 Reaper drone to help locate targets well beyond the front lines. The aircraft quickly moved to the top of Kiev's weapons wish list after the White House authorized transfers of longer-range missiles. So Ukraine finally got the long-range ATACMS that they want, that can hit targets up to 190 miles away. And now they're saying, all right, next thing is MQ-9 Reaper drones, and they're saying that they want these for targeting, but they're also capable of, carrying Hellfire missiles and things like that, so they could launch pretty long-range drone strikes with these MQ-9s potentially. One reason the U.S. has been hesitant is because they're worried about Russia downing an MQ-9 and getting a hold of it, the technology that's in there. Russia did down an MQ-9 over the Black Sea last year after a Russian fighter jet dumped fuel on the drone. The Houthis have downed 3 over the past few months, so they're definitely vulnerable to being shot down. And I think the idea that would probably keep them far away from the front line and use it, their surveillance, I guess, could probably go a pretty long way. Maybe they would try to keep them out of range of Russian air defenses. But this is their big ask now. They got the ATACMS. They want the MQ-9 Reaper drones. The next one here, Ukrainians abroad slam plan to deny embassy services. So this article's from Al Jazeera. This is interesting. They basically just spoke with Ukrainians who live, in this case, in Poland, and about how Ukraine is trying to pressure them to come home and fight. And one of these, some of the people that they talk to have been outside of Ukraine since before the war. One of them is saying, that he's, working in Poland and sending money to his family in Ukraine and supporting them, and that he doesn't want to go fight. There's a few of them says, hey, the government's corrupt. We don't want to go fight for them. This is a quote from Anton, who's 19 years old and left Ukraine after the war began. He said, quote, I support individual battalions in Ukraine with donations every month. This is my duty. But I don't want to fight as I don't trust our government. They don't care about people, and they don't care if there's a war going on. They're corrupt and keep stealing the money that we pay for the army. Why go to war for a state who only wants to steal? End quote. And, similar comments to what Ukrainians living near the front line said in response to the U.S. approving the new aid, saying that it's only going to prolong the war. Our officials are corrupt. It's going to benefit them, but it's not going to benefit us. So I just thought that was interesting. And, Poland and Lithuania say that they could potentially help pressure these Ukrainians to go back to Ukraine. All right, so the last story here, Israel used a U.S.-made bomb on Lebanese paramedics. So this article is from Jason Ditz. On March 27th, Israel attacked a building in Habayari, southern Lebanon, which housed the Islamic Emergency and Relief Corps. The attacks killed 7 volunteer paramedics and was deeply criticized internationally as a war crime. A new report from The Guardian revealed the bomb used in the attacks was a U.S.-made joint attack munition known as JDAM, produced by Boeing. JDAMs figure prominently among the items Israel requests from the U.S. Though U.S. law is meant to prevent arms transfers from going to nations that are committing war crimes, the U.S. routinely provides these to Israel in large quantities, and they have been used very heavily in Gaza. All sorts of atrocities being committed with these U.S.-provided bombs in Gaza, but this is an attack on medical personnel in Lebanon. And Jason did cover this at the time that this strike happened. So this is just another example of, it's not just Gaza where Israel is using U.S.-provided weapons to kill civilians, but the military aid continues to flow, and the State Department claims that they're not violating international law, which is a complete joke. But that is it for the news for today. Just a reminder, again, we're still doing our fundraiser. We're moving along pretty well. So if you go to antiwar.com/donate, you can see the different ways you can support us. And this is how we do it. This is how we get by. We are entirely reliant on donations from our readers and now listeners of this show. And so if you like this show, if you appreciate what I do, this is how it's done. So antiwar.com/donate to help us out. And I appreciate everybody who's helped us out so far. I've heard from a lot of people who've given donations, so we really, really appreciate it. It is tough to ask people for money. I really don't like doing it. But anyway, go check out our Viewpoints. We have one from Ron Paul. The Great Ukraine Robbery is not over yet. One from Sheldon Richman. Another bogus anti-Semitism scare. One from Ken Klippenstein. Claims that student protesters are chanting death to America are BS. One from Ted Snyder. The U.S. cannot help Ukraine win the war. One from Ghassan Abu Sitta. I spent 43 days in Gaza's now destroyed hospitals. So please go check all of that out. Share the show. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Follow us on Instagram, X. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.